Hey everyone, let's jump right into this explainer. We usually picture a nation's birth as this one grand unified moment of triumph, but the truth is almost always so much more intricate. It's usually filled with competing ideologies, regional priorities, and vastly different visions for the future. Today, we're diving into the fascinating origins of Nigeria's First Republic. We're going to explore three totally distinct threads: early nationalist agitation, regional welfarism, and traditionalist conservatism that all wove together to create the complex tapestry and the underlying tensions of early independent Nigeria. Here is what we're looking at today. 1. The roots of Nigerian nationalism. 2. Awolowo and Western welfarism. 3. The 1961 Northern election. And 4. Power, progress, and polarization. Section 1. Roots of Nigerian nationalism and the early resistance. Let's kick things off with the birth of Nigerian political identity. Enter Herbert Macaulay in the early 20th century. Macaulay was actually a trained civil engineer and surveyor who flipped from being a colonial civil servant into one of the absolute loudest critics of British policies in Lagos. He famously declared, "The dimensions of the true interests of the natives at heart are algebraically equal to the length, breadth, and depth of the white man's pocket." What a quote, right? It just brilliantly illustrates his sharp, vocal critique of British interests. He used his platform, especially the Nigerian Daily News, to relentlessly expose European corruption and completely challenge their claims that they were governing strictly for the benefit of the native population. Now, what's really fascinating here is the wildly nuanced picture of Macaulay's life. On one hand, you've got these massive public triumphs. He founded Nigeria's first political party, the NNDP, in 1923, and successfully championed traditional chiefs all the way to the Privy Council in London in the famous Ulua land case. But on the flip side, he was embroiled in some pretty heavy legal controversies. We're talking a 1913 conviction for misappropriating trust funds, though, to be fair, some historians do argue he was unfairly targeted by colonial authorities. He was even jailed again in his 60s for sedition over a rumored gunpowder plot. It's a complex history of a guy who was clearly willing to push the boundaries. So that begs the question, was Herbert Macaulay the only founder of nationalism? Well, while historical records frequently crown him as the undisputed father of nationalism, modern academic critiques tell us to pump the brakes a bit. Focusing solely on elite educated men in Lagos kind of overshadows the massive decolonization roles played by marginalized groups. For example, Igbo women and their grassroots resistance movements were equally vital to shaking the foundations of colonial rule. History is, rarely a one-man show. Moving on to Section 2. Awolowo and Western welfarism and a shift to governance. By the 1950s, Nigerian leaders like Obafemi Awolowo had finally secured regional autonomy, meaning they actually had the power to implement their own developmental visions. Awolowo's core belief that the intellectual capacity of the people was absolutely essential. So as premier of the Western region, his governance strategy was built on this philosophy called welfarism. This was essentially a pragmatic blend of socialist ideals and capitalist principles. He firmly believed the government had a duty to step in proactively to protect the welfare of the majority, make sure resources were distributed equitably, and provide massive public education programs to uplift the masses. And he absolutely put his money where his mouth was, especially when it came to education. Under his universal primary education policy, student enrollment in the Western region just skyrocketed. We're talking jumping from about 429,000 in 1953 to over 1 million by 1959. To put that into perspective, that is a staggering increase in just 6 years. Now, critics definitely questioned the massive financial cost of this, which required an initial £10 million, but Awolowo funded it anyway through bold austerity measures and regional taxation, because he saw education not as some luxury, but as a fundamental human right. Beyond the classroom, his welfarist approach completely reshaped the region's physical and economic landscape to drive upward social mobility. His administration launched Western Nigeria television, literally the very first in Africa, because he recognized media as a vital tool to enlighten the public. He established extensive farm settlements to modernize agriculture and boost local jobs. He built out comprehensive primary healthcare centers, so medical access was decentralized, ensuring care actually reached the margins. Oh, and he kicked off a massive project to tar rural roads with a bituminous surface, finally connecting isolated farmers directly to vital regional markets. All these targeted achievements laid incredible groundwork for human capital growth. All right, let's shift gears to Section 3, the 1961 Northern election and consolidating power. So, while the West was hyper-focused on rapid modernization and welfarism, The vast northern region, led by Sir Ahmadu Bello, took a totally different approach. They prioritized cultural continuity, stability, and leveraging their massive population size. Let's look at the timeline. Following Nigeria's national independence in October 1960, the country was trying to navigate a really delicate federal structure. Just a few months later, in February 1961, the Northern Cameroons voted via plebiscite to integrate with the northern region. This effectively expanded the northern voter base and territory, perfectly setting the stage for May 1961, a crucial regional legislative election that would really test the power dynamics of this newly independent nation.
The results of that election? Absolutely staggering. The Northern People's Congress, or NPC, captured 160 seats. This was a wildly lopsided landslide victory that allowed them to completely dominate the 170-member assembly. Meanwhile, the opposition parties, like the Action Group Alliance and NEPU, barely even made a dent.
The distribution of electoral power clearly heavily favored the incumbent party. Now, opposition groups absolutely claimed there was systematic voter suppression, restricted campaigning, and outright intimidation by traditional local rulers who were aligned with the NPC. But regardless of those claims, the official results indisputably handed immense federal leverage straight to the northern region. It gave the North massive influence in the national coalition government. If we impartially analyze this, we see a really stark ideological clash right at the heart of northern politics. On one side, you have the dominant NPC. They were traditionalist, conservative, and deeply backed by the House of Fulani aristocratic emirs. Their focus was heavily on northernization and protecting Islamic cultural norms from rapid westernization. Then, on the other side, you had the primary opposition, NEPU, led by Aminu Kano. They were this populist, anti-feudal movement, loudly demanding socialist-leaning reforms and empowerment for the Talakawa, or the commoners. But in 1961, traditional conservatism overwhelmingly shut down those calls for radical reform. Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, Power, Progress, and Polarization, and the First Republic's Legacy. Okay, let's bring all these threads together. We've got early radical agitation down in Lagos, progressive welfarism out in the West, and deeply entrenched traditionalist power up in the North. The legacy of these early politics is basically a giant puzzle of contradictions. Yes, strong regional autonomy sparked incredible local achievements, like Awolowo's million-student education boom, but it also created a very disjointed, uneven national development. That intense clash between nationalism, welfarism, and traditionalist conservatism fueled a highly volatile political landscape. It deepened ethnic and class-based divides, it marginalized minority voices within those regions, and ultimately, it really exposed the fragility of the First Republic, unfortunately setting the stage for the instability that would follow. So what does this all mean for us today? As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to chew on. How do the ideological and regional battle lines drawn back in the 1950s and 60s continue to echo in modern political landscapes right now? Because honestly, the questions about resource distribution, the role of traditional power, the need for social welfare, and the quest for real national unity, those didn't just vanish when the First Republic fell. I highly encourage you to dive a little deeper into how these deeply rooted historical divides are literally still shaping conversations around governance and unity in Nigeria today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.